So, what I was thinking, this is just kind of like a new draft of what they did before, adoption policy-wise. As you can see where it says adoption fee, it's a $30 flat rate to adopt an animal, and then the add-on depends on the average cost of spay and neuter between the vet's offices. So, from what I averaged it out, and everybody has to understand that prices go up every year. And we've got feline leukemia tests in question, which is about $5 or $25 a test if you buy them in bulk. Heartworm tests $10 to $15 if you buy them in bulk. That's if they don't get them done at the vet's office because there's no extra fees. And so for a small dog, the average falls in between $130 and $180. Large
That includes,
spay, neuter, rabies, and adoption fee.
okay.
Yeah.
With the heartworm and
Yeah, and I took the bottom price. I took like the dog neuter bottom price on that and averaged it out because otherwise it was going to get really ridiculous. So I just put, 130 to 180 range, and that is because the average spay is about $20 to $30 more expensive than a neuter. So large dog 180 to 200 range. That's unfortunately what it averages out to be. Cats, I have 80 to 100 range, but if we stick with Carroll County and Joy, who has lowered her prices, that can go down about 20
We'll
bucks.
keep it the same so that you don't lose money on your dogs.
What is it?
Won't you lose money on your dogs? Otherwise, if you lower the cats, that might help to balance out the money that you lose on the dogs.
Right, it might. I need to come up with a, how did you guys do it in the past? Did you have a different small dog, large dog adoption?
No, we strictly had one dog adoption fee and one cat adoption
Okay.
fee. And we did not go about the averaging of all the vets. We tended to want to make a relationship with
Right.
what vet was going to provide the
Right,
lowest service for the cost. And then they were left with the option, though at that time, there were animals that were not getting spayed or neutered before they left. And so if the individual wanted to pick a given vet and pay whatever that vet's charges were at that time, we collected them, scheduled the appointment that day for the animal to go over there.
okay,
That we had to fight long battles of this situation of supposed to give all the vets in town a certain amount of business. No, I'm
Right.
sorry, we're gonna go with whoever gives us the best pricing. And then we even moved as far as if that best pricing was out of town, that was fine too.
Right.
Our goal was not to subsidize the local vets, but it was to provide the best service for the lowest dollar.
Yeah,
Right.
way back when I adopted my dog, they gave you a voucher for whatever.
At
set
one
amount
time,
of
they
money.
gave a flat voucher out for $25, and then were supposed to turn the voucher in to offset some of the spay neuter costs. The problem that was happening with that is only about 10 or 15% of the vouchers were ever getting turned in. The people weren't getting the animals spayed or neutered.
What is the current fees to adopt?
it's $45 a cat and $100 a dog. And as far as like the local vets goes, I want to stay on a good relationship and good standing shelter-wise with everyone in town. I would like to be able to go to each one of them for certain things when I need them, and spay and neuter is a little costly. So I have my certain ones that I prefer, but if another vet can get me in to do it, I think it's important to establish a relationship with that vet too.
Yeah, as far as I've been noticing, online, large dog rescues, pretty much everywhere around's been going at $200, so.
Yeah.
How often do you, what are you, okay, so this would obviously increase the pricing of adoptions. Do you foresee adoptions decreasing because the fee has gone up
I
to
do.
adopt?
Especially
So-
cats.
It was cats.
I see it, I foresee it reducing.
Personally, think that medical care Like
Right.
this should be supplemented by county funds and city funds and Hanover funds and, yeah, I would
Humane
say that's,
Society.
yeah, I
That would
would, like
be
Humane
something
Society,
Humane
I'd say that's
Society.
part of operational cost of running a shelter is providing the care for the animals.
Humane Society supplements veterinary care and spay neuter within the community. I don't believe we're gonna be willing to open the door to where we do that directly with the shelter. So that's the government side of things, and it's basically supporting the shelter off of donations. It's just the donations are coming through the Humane Society instead of directly to the shelter. And I have been adamant all along that the county needs to fund the operation. Now, if there's things that are extraordinary and so forth, and towards capital improvement projects to make it better livelihood for them, I can see doing that with donations. But it's like asking your law enforcement officers to provide public safety based on donations that come in. And it's a lot to deal with.
This being my first year, at 6 months, when we do the review of the budget and how much has gone towards what so far, that'll give me a better idea of what a year's worth of the bedding and stuff would cost.
Yeah.
And so that'll give me a better idea on, you know, what I'm able to do, what's reasonable, what's, I don't know, cost efficient for the county
Unfortunately,
budget.
you may have to show that the number of adoptions decrease before
Right.
the county will give you more money.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I don't like the idea of like bouncing around with adoption fees, and I don't like the idea of increasing adoption fees when I believe medical care is part of just general operations of the shelter. That should be supplemented through the funding, the operational funding that goes to the shelter.
We're on the same page there.
So I know it's hard because you're in a weird spot right now because you didn't have any say-so over this past budget. And
Right.
I know like full budget hasn't been used in the past, but I see you using full budget and being like,
Yeah.
oh, thank God I got this money, I
Yeah.
can use it for this that I need.
Yeah.
Where in the past, I know that wasn't the case. Like she thought by coming under budget that it looked better, but we'd rather you use that money and be able to better, I personally, and be able to better care for the animals that way.
Right.
So.
Well, it gets to be difficult. It depends on, you know, regardless, there's not going to be an unlimited pot of money to come out of, you know, as far as what county or city is willing to put into it. So you get into questions as to, you know, I feel that we're better to spend some of those dollars on the supplementing the adoption costs as far as not trying to recover 100% of what the spay neuter cost and the so forth was. Because, and cut back on some of the medical. I mean, for example, if you're making decisions that we're going to treat every treatable dog that's there, so we're testing for heartworm, and a dog tests positive for heartworm, you're looking at a $700 plus bill. That's the equivalent of supplementing $50 each on 14 dogs towards spay and neuter.
Well, I think with like, so if there's a dog that comes in and it has heartworm, and I personally don't think, oh, this dog has heartworm, we need to euthanize this dog. I think there's cases where you take that one dog and say, this dog needs heartworm treatment, we'd love your support, and get the community to donate towards the care for that animal, because they would. Like, you can see it in other shelters, they'll say, emergency medical expenses needed, and then you make sure that those dollars go to fund the emergency care for that dog. And then if there's extra, the emergency care of any other dogs that may, or cats too, that may come into the shelter. But I don't think like an animal should be written off because it comes in sick.
No, it shouldn't be written off if it comes in sick. There are certain circumstances, feline leukemia, for instance, where there is no returning point from it. What kind of life is that cat gonna
Yeah.
live? I mean, if you have somebody that's willing to take a cat in like that and foster it for the last year, it's like, hey, that's great, I'm all for that. But other than that, it's just gonna sit in the shelter and it's gonna get sick and sick and sick, and I've had to put down 3 since I've started because of feline leukemia,
And
unfortunately.
I know you've had like hospice dogs that you
Yes.
were able to find homes for.
Yes, this community is great when it comes to that. MVP, we did not have any takers on anything like
Wow.
that. So people have really stepped up in this community to take an interest in those kinds of situations.
Yeah,
So that's not, I mean, that's not me, that's the community that's
yeah,
doing
but
that,
I mean,
yeah.
it's your work in the shelter, because those dogs, I mean, Joy helped nurse them, but those dogs could have just been turned around and euthanized, but instead Joy nursed them back to health, and you found people willing to give them that hospice end-of-life care.
Yeah.
I want to be clear, I'm not advocating that every animal that comes in with expensive or serious medical conditions is automatically going to be euthanized. But I think that we have to be able to give our shelter director the flexibility
Yeah,
to do so when budget requires it to be so, and when you don't necessarily are able to find the resources
which is what
outside of it.
I put in the last thing that I sent everyone for my ideas, my suggestions for our euthanasia. Oh, you
Here, I
done
got
it?
a copy of it, I wrote it.
For my youth, like to embrace a no-kill policy, and I know we're not on that topic yet, but a no-kill doesn't mean you don't, it doesn't mean you don't euthanize, there's going to be animals. But part of it is, that's in it, is doing like evaluation determinations, which you noted, but making sure you do that medical evaluation. From there, you're looking at, healthy animals, animals deemed treatable, animals deemed untreatable, what do you do in that case? And then animals who are just suffering that, you need to say, there's no treatment for them at this point, and their life is miserable, they need to be humanely euthanized. But even untreatable animals, if we have, in cases where we have someone willing to take them through hospice, or a rescue group willing to take them, let's give them that chance. And by providing that sort of like flexibility, and I put in here that no single person should make that determination, that should come down to the animal shelter director, the appointed veterinarian on the animal shelter advisory board when applicable, and then in behavioral issues, an animal behaviorist. That I don't think it should just be like, I think that's a lot to ask of Lindsay too, to
Well, I'm not a
make
medical
all the
professional.
calls on it.
Right,
Yeah,
I mean, I may be able to diagnose
From
things
having,
from
from
sight.
having been at the shelter and spent a great deal of time there is definitely a need at times to bring a medical opinion in and so
Oh, yeah.
forth, to get a veterinarian in. But the majority of the time, the director needs to be in the position to make those decisions. When you start bringing them in as a decision of 3-4 people, what are we gonna do? Gonna vote on it? And it causes huge disruptions in the morale within the staff. There's times that are hard enough when the staff doesn't think a particular animal should have been euthanized, but yet your shelter director saw very clearly there wasn't another solution there. And it just becomes a huge
which I think
personnel
if
problem.
you have, so you have, say, it's a medical condition, well then you have a vet opinion, and then Lindsay can tell her staff, well, this animal had to be euthanized, this is why, this is our medical evaluation of this animal. Say it's a behavioral issue, you have we can have a behaviorist, Lindsay can say, hey, and Lindsay does great with this. She can say, no, I don't see this animal having a turnaround. I don't see a rescue coming in and pulling them. I see that this animal is just unfortunately too far gone. And with that second opinion to validate what she's saying, it helps her with her staff. So her staff's not raising hell because she euthanized one that her staff didn't believe.
For that to work, you're going to have a contractual agreement with whatever vets are gonna be involved in that. And the vet's gonna have to be willing to be involved and be available on a 24-hour basis.
Yeah, which
And,
is why I said that it should be an appointed veterinarian on the animal shelter.
Now that, you're saying that with the appointed veterinarian, it wouldn't automatically fall to that person.
It doesn't have to, we
I
can discuss
can't
this when we get
imagine
further
that,
into
The
euthanasia.
appointed veterinarian on the shelter board is automatically gonna want the job of making the decision
Well, I mean,
on all the euthanasia.
that's fine, we can get to that when we get to the euthanasia policy, but I don't think we should say, I think we're looking at medical expenses, and we need to really be looking too at our budget of, okay, we need to have an emergency care expense, we need to have just general operational care expenses, and then we need to have obviously the budgets in place for managing staff, managing the building, those sort of things, but I would hate to see us increase our adoption fees because there's not funding for the medical care.
I would rather lose a little bit on each animal as long as we get them adopted out, you know. It actually, you know, in the long run, it costs more to have a full shelter
Yeah.
and not be able to adopt them out, so.
Right, and really it all depends on, every county's different, their rules and what they prefer. Where I came from, they didn't wanna lose anything off of them. So, I mean, if that's something that the county is willing to work with me on, hey, that's great, But every county's different, so, I mean, that's something that you gotta have a sit-down conversation about before you make the decision.
You know, I'd rather go on the low end to begin with, and then, you know, if it becomes too much of a problem, we can always adjust later.
Right, and I primarily use Joy in Carroll County for spay, neuter, and rabies. Waltz has been doing some cats lately. They are starting to work with us more, but I thought about just taking those 2 vets offices and averaging those costs out and doing it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, right, is like, we don't want to, it would be better to lose a little bit of money on that than to house them, because that, in the end, the longer they're there, the more money we're spending housing these animals, so, you know, food and all of that.
And the harder they are to adopt, you know, if they're in a kennel for
Yes.
6
Oh, yeah.
years, for 6
Yes.
months,
Yeah,
it's not good on the animal.
So we have a spay and neuter fund, a rabies fund, and a general fund, and a supply fund. Our general just is for areas that bleed in the budget, but, I mean, what if we opened up a donation portion, like those funds are off of donations, I put, you know, like the funeral home checks and stuff like that in them. And so what if we open up an emergency medical expense one?
We can do that.
So that way, I don't know, I'm just
Yeah.
asking for kind of input here. I think it's a lot of funds to manage, but,
Well, I'm gonna talk to the auditor about something different anyway, but,
yeah, and I didn't set that, I mean, that's just the option that they gave
No,
me.
no,
how to do
I
it,
mean,
yeah.
I mean, it's just because we get funded, you know, from the county, the
Right.
city, from Hanover. But the county makes a budget just on what the county has, and then the city's money is really not budgeted.
Okay,
So, like with the health department and the 911, they have actually separate funds
okay.
set up for the state, and, you know, so, we'll see about doing that, and maybe moving a couple line items from the county budget into the city's portion. That way,
Yeah, and I mean, as you know, the interlocal agreement states that the city gives $15,000 a year. At some point, it's gotten up to $44,000, which is what the city has allocated, like set aside for this year's funding. So we may need to like revisit that too,
well,
so
that's
that,
another thing, once
Yeah,
we do
so
the
that's
budget, I was
there.
gonna get with the commissioners, to see about getting with the city and
But,
Hanover about.
yeah,
a new
and with
agreement.
the direction that the shelter's going, I mean, city doesn't want to fund a shelter that's stuck on like a kill philosophy. We want to move towards no kill reasonably. And once you have a better idea of the budget, it'll actually present it to the city too, and the city may say, hey, yeah, we can contribute more to this because they've fully seen it and fully discussed it. And the needs are there, saying, hey, we want to ask you for more. You know, we want to help, hey, will the city come help and sponsor the adoption fees? Will the city contribute towards that? Those sort of things. So another, I think at some point, you may have suggested this, but I may be lying, of like an adoption fee for a fixed animal versus an unfixed animal, and then putting down a deposit to make sure that that animal gets fixed. Am I correct? Am I making that up?
The Indiana statute requires that if an animal leaves the shelter unfixed, that you collect a $75
Okay.
deposit. And then once the animal is spayed or neutered, that $75 is returned to the person
Okay.
that had it spayed and neutered. Now, the county or this does not have, if the person does not get the animal spayed and neutered, you do not get the $75. It has to be turned over to the state of Indiana through the Bureau of Motor Vehicles on an annual basis. And then they're supposedly going to use that to promote spay and neuter.
So,
The Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
That's how it was set
Is
up.
there-
They put in 15th
Wow.
Street.
so with that, so I know Lindsay like works really hard to make sure all the animals leaving are fixed before they're leaving. Could we look at the what do you think? Do you think people will end up fixing it if they have their $75 deposit? Do you think they will
Yes, I
then
think
follow
we
up with that?
definitely, and well,
Explore
Lindsay's
that
already
option.
made those type of arrangements more or
Yeah.
less. I definitely think that we have got to go ahead and get the animals that are too young to spay or neuter, they need to be adopted out as soon as possible and collect the $75.
Yes.
The policy that Jenny had in place of keeping those animals in the shelter till they were old enough to be spayed or neutered created the cat overpopulation problem that you
Feral
were faced
cat,
with.
yeah.
Yes, created a lot of problems
Yeah.
there.
So, not just animals who are too young to be fixed, but say like a dog's finally past its stray hold and you can't get it into the vet for a while and someone really wants to adopt it, are we okay to say, okay, you make your $75 deposit, this dog needs to get fixed, if you set up the appointment, once the dog is fixed, come back and we'll give you your $75 deposit? Or are we
I think you can-
hesitant on that?
I think you can handle it a couple ways in that situation. I think that you can, if the shelter is, the person isn't going to pay any more money, they're going to pay their full adoption fee to the shelter, and the shelter makes sure that the appointment is made for that animal to be spayed or neutered. They have to track it. If it isn't, there has to be language in the agreement that gives the shelter the ability to send animal control out and pick the animal back up. But the vast majority of people are going to follow up on the spay and neuter.
Okay, so do we then want to maybe have a set, like, a fixed animal, a fixed cat adoption fee is this fee, a fixed dog's adoption fee is this fee, and then say unfixed is this plus the $75 deposit?
Well, the problem with
That
that,
help
see, the county's paying for, like, if I get a dog in, say Toto,
Okay,
so we fixed Toto while Toto was in the shelter, that is still part of the adoption fee. That is part of what they're paying for. Now, it is different if somebody, like owner relinquishes an animal and they come in already fixed and vaccinated, then you would just charge the adoption fee, you wouldn't charge them any further medical fees. But because the county is funding the spay, neuter, and rabies, that will be part of their adoption fee, unfortunately.
okay, so I was just curious if like, so say a stray animal comes in and it's fixed already,
Mhm.
still charging that same
No,
fee?
if it comes into the shelter and it's spayed, neutered, and all you're doing is a rabies shot, then no, then it would be the $30
$30 fee.
fee.
Okay.
Yeah.
I disagree. I think that you should
I think that's
pick
the
up
only
where
way
you
to make it
can.
up, honey.
You have one set of prices, whether they were fixed or not fixed when they came in.
Yeah,
And if you can gain some revenue that helps offset some other, I'd go ahead and collect it.
yeah,
'Cause
instead of
it's-
that lower.
Especially if we're going to stay with this 45 and 100
Mhm.
fees that are being supplemented.
I just feel like I'm ripping people off by doing that.
But you're
You're
not,
not at
because
all.
a good
You're not at
person won't,
No.
like a good person wanting to adopt an animal, they won't look at that as you're ripping them off, because also they don't know. They don't know that that animal came in fixed. They don't have any idea that that's how you receive, I think, and you did a better job explaining that than I did, but
If
yeah,
you-
one
you
fixed
average it
fee.
out, you know, and the same thing, you could say, well, if they adopted a male dog and they had to pay more, they got ripped off because it wasn't as much to
Right.
spay or neuter as it would have been a female. But no, you look at that as a package and
Right.
put one fee, whether it's male, female, and
Yeah,
dog, cat, or so forth.
Right.
It's so much simpler for staff, public,
dangerous and can really, I'm just gonna tell you what happened with me once when I was a director. I had a big, beautiful white shepherd named Tanner. And Tanner came in because he bit somebody. And all my staff were like, no, you can't do anything to Tanner, he's so rare, he's so beautiful. And he was. And he got along well with most women and some men. It took me 3 times before I learned. And the last time I sent him out to be adopted, and we worked and we worked, he got in the car, the kid was in the back seat, the family turned around before they even got to the highway and said, we're surrendering him. He was in the back and he was growling at my child. And then they were still mad at me. So this is where I'm gonna say, you know, deciding by a committee is not gonna be a good thing for your shelter director. I think she's really qualified, she's been down that road. If she has doubts, she needs to have people that she can go to. But she needs to be able to do that,
Yeah.
because that was a mistake I made early
I
on.
also think.
The child almost got bit.
I also think that every dog is different and like maybe that a child almost got bit. But there's been situations of a dog bit a child because the child was just being a little jerk to the dog and the parents weren't watching. And the dog needed to be in a no-kid home. And I think if we foster great relationships with our community, we foster relationships with rescues, which Lindsay has really worked on. And we foster relationships with people who are willing to foster these, like there's older people, that we can make this happen. I personally have a bite dog. His name is Elliot. Elliot was kept on a chain for 2 years of his life. He was never a pet. He lived in his own feces, and his owner was so horrible that I would have to sneak into
Sure.
the yard to put food and water out there.
And you know, you're-
Eventually, I got the owner to give me the dog, at which point, anytime I touched him, he bit me. Anytime I did anything with him, he would snap. He was a freak. I was told he would never be able to live with another dog, a cat, or any other animals. I've had him for 6 years as of Monday. He does not bite. He does not nip. He loves to be pet.
He's a good dog.
Lives with 5 other dogs, 5 cats.
He's a good dog.
And I don't know how many, I have 26
So
animals
what you're-
total, so it's,
Yeah.
it's
Let me go back to the
circumstantial.
option
If you'll
side
excuse
here.
me,
Yeah.
Warren, just for a
I'm
second,
curious,
Warren.
On your sheet here.
Warren, can I
Yeah.
finish?
Yeah.
Hannah, you're right. You're talking about the adoptability of that dog.
Yeah.
So what she has to do
Is being
is she has to say, any bite dog has to go through special screening for adoptability. She can't adopt to a
Oh, yeah.
family. So
I
again,
agree.
euthanizing goes back to adoptability, and she has to set the standard for adoptability. And so,
But also she can set the standard that this dog can thrive in a home without children.
absolutely,
And
that's
she
the
can set a-
standard.
Yeah, and she can
That's the
set a
standard.
standard that this dog, would do great in a rescue.
Good job.
So that's what I'm trying to get at, is that it's circumstantial when it comes to these animals. You can't say, oh, any dog that bites is a bad dog. No, it probably had a bad human that made it act that way,
She's gonna
so.
need to have those standards for an adoptability for an at-risk animal. That's
Yes.
what it is, it's an at-risk animal.
Yeah.
So she's
And I
gonna have to set that,
if
and
you
her
go-
staff will have to be
Yeah,
trained.
and if you go to other shelters too, like they will have cards that say this dog is okay with families with kids who are 12 and older, but cannot be okay with kids.
Right.
Even cats. I've rescued cats and adopted them out and said this cat cannot go with a kid because it does not like to be held. So it has to go into an adult only.
Right, and
Household,
that's what
so-
we do now. I don't know if everybody knows what a safer test is, but I conduct a safer test with every animal that comes through there. It's kind of hard to do with cats, because cats don't care.
Cats are weird.
Cats just don't care. But she could probably handle any cat, but I struggle.
Bye.
Yeah,
check out
cat whisperer over here.
On your adoption fees that you have here, the 160 and the 120, for example, on the canine side, that number, is that including for example, in the spay, that's the spay and heartworm costs and,
Are you talking about up here?
the one, no, down below, you have
Right.
you have a fee here listed of $160. What does Carroll County charge for a spay on a dog?
That's, on a dog, it just depends on if it's a neuter or a
Well, you've got two
Spay.
figures here, you've got 160 on spay and 120,
120 on a canine neuter, yeah.
and then
160,
160,
167 total dog spay, that's with the rabies shot fee
that's with the
too.
rabies shot.
Yes,
But
sir.
is there a heartworm test in that fee?
No, there's not a heartworm
Okay,
test
so
in
there's
that
not a
fee.
heartworm test in that
Mhm.
fee, so I'm just trying to get some ideas.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we looked at those two, the actual spay cost would average $140.
Right.
Between male and female.
Mhm.
Then you're gonna add $7.50 to that for the
Right.
rabies. And then what else you're adding? How much for the heartworm test that you're doing?
Well, I eventually am gonna order from a wholesale for that and do that at the shelter myself, because I can do that myself. I can do
Right, you can do those.
Yes.
How much is that gonna be when you're doing
up
it?
here in the corner. So if you order from bulk a feline leukemia test, and you can correct me on this if this is wrong, but it's
So
about
you're gonna be-
$25 a
I
test.
found some cheaper than that
Did you? Okay, and then the heartworm 10 to 15.
though. I found some cheaper than that.
Okay, see, the boss has spoken. But yeah, that's just
So
what I
call the
researched.
heartworm 10, is that safe, or 750?
I would say it's 10 right
10,
now.
10 right now. Well, then if you
The leukemia test I
roll
found
the
something like
rabies up roughly,
Okay.
that 140 is going to move up to about 160 as far as
Right.
what your actual costs are. So, you know, for example, when you look at 800 animals a year on the dog side, you're going to have to be funding an additional, what, $4,800 and some dollars
Right.
for that cost on that group. And then you could do the same thing on the cats and get some idea as to where you're staying in your budget on that,
Okay.
separate from it.
I think we'll have a better idea of medical once you've been there for 6 months, which is hard because that's when budget is happening and they kind of
Right.
need the numbers before then. But
Right.
I think if we set these for now, the $145 and then 75, and it doesn't matter if they're fixed or not, keep it at that 100 because you can
Right.
make up some of that.
So you're gonna end up somewhere in your budget having a line item, for example, on dogs, that you're gonna end up 4,800. It's not medical, it's towards adoption costs.
Okay.
And you'd
Yeah.
have a number similar for cats that you'd put in your budget. And then you're going to list your budgets for medical separate from that.
Yeah. And then, do we have a preventative care, like budget line item? Would we want that?
We have vet costs,
Okay.
medications,
Okay.
spay, neuter, rabies.
Okay.
And then in the extra funding that comes in through donations, we have shelter supply. It's kind of like a backup fund to the budget.
Okay.
So if we bleed in any of those, they can dump that money into the categories. We have a general spay, neuter, rabies
Okay.
supply.
So, moving on with the adoption policy, I have the one that you had worked on. and
Right.
You said this was gonna be like the biggest thing for you. So with those adoption fees, it includes the spay and neuter, and a $60 to $75 deposit, 1 year's rabies vaccination, deworming, first round of boosters. Are you doing 1 month of flea and tick preventative?
I put it
or-
in there when they come in anyways. I keep that medication on them when they're in the shelter.
And then microchip, is there
Yes.
anything else that needs to be included in that list? Probably a joy question.
Well, I think that depending on how long the animal is at the shelter, it's not just the first round of boosters.
Okay.
Because when you look at like best care for shelter animals, as far as vaccinations go, if they're over 16 weeks and they've been there for like 3 weeks, say, they'll get a vaccination when they come into the shelter, and then they have to have a vaccination 2 weeks later.
Okay.
And so they would be fully vaccinated if they're over the age of 16 weeks by the time they get adopted.
Okay.
If they've been there for 3 weeks.
Okay.
And then for puppies, depending on their age and how long they've been there, it's you vaccinate them on intake, and then it's every 2 weeks until they're at least 16 weeks of age, or they go out of the shelter.
Okay.
So there would be a slight change on just the initial vaccination series with that, because that just depends on time.
Okay. Okay.
And then same thing with cats too.
Okay.
Then this,
Yeah, and I know we
this
have some
$60
different-
number I was talking about is not real yet, then you still have probably another $20 or $30 costs that you'll have to put onto that when you start looking at what you're gonna have to have in your budget to cover all that.
Realistically, yes.
Yeah.
By the time you put the chip in and the booster shots and all
Yeah.
of that.
And the chip is 10.
Yeah, so
So-
you may be approaching $100
Mhm.
in versus before it's over with there.
And depending, you might wanna look at other companies for microchips, because like
Right.
our microchips, if we paid the registration fee for
Mhm.
like when we have clients come in that get chipped, the microchip itself is free, what they're paying for is the registration.
Right, and that's, I don't like the microchips that we use
Yeah.
because they have to get on there and pay a $45 lifetime registration for their animal, and that's not something they're expecting fully when they get those microchips, so we're getting a lot of animals back with blank microchips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you might look into something else, because there may be other companies that will do that. Like the new owner may still have to go in and register,
Mhm.
but I know that like it's not like a $50 fee for ours. But they still might have to go in and register, but then there's no cost for you to get the microchip. They send us, like, once we register a certain number of chips, they send us another box, because that means we're low.
Okay,
And so we do all of the registering ourselves with the owner's information.
okay, yeah, that would be a lot easier,
But yeah,
Yeah,
and the
and-
microchips themselves are free.
fix a lot of problems.
Yeah, because it's just the cost of the membership, the registration.
Yeah.
What's the membership running for the registration?
It depends on the company. Ours is like $35.
Okay, so you're talking more costs, though, is what I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
but the owner could do that, is what I'm saying. Like, you could say, you need to go register this microchip now to the new owner.
If
There's a
you're, right, you
cost.
can allow them to do that, but if we,
And then the
Right.
new
It
box of
depends
chips
how
would
quick-
get,
If that all happens, I mean, when you do it, you see it gets registered at the
yeah, we
time.
do it.
But
we
the
do it.
microchip company, when she's put out 100 of them and only 50 of them ended up getting registered, they're gonna holler pretty quick.
Right.
And then it's gonna be important, if we're doing it that way, that to where she's not registering the fees being paid at that moment, you're gonna have to maintain your own database separate. And do you do that on the microchips? You have your own searchable database?
I call, normally I call the pet point number, or I enter every microchip number to the pet as I put them into the system. So if I were to go in and search the database with a microchip number, it should pop that
Should
pet up.
pop up,
Mhm.
okay.
Yep. As far as the national database. Yeah. And like if I get an intake dog in, and it's got a microchip and it's not registered to a certain address, I have to call if it's not a dog that came from us. I can't search the national database system, I can only search what came from our shelter.
And we want to make sure when they're leaving the shelter that that microchip is registered.
I would like for that to happen, yes.
Because there, all the time, you've had some come in that are unregistered microchips.
Right.
I have a dog that was unregistered microchip that the hunters then said they didn't want, but, we need to make sure that we're pushing for those, so you said, so there's a fee to register that microchip, and it's how much, I'm sorry?
It depends on the
Depends.
company that you use,
Okay.
but we might look at other companies,
Yeah.
because that may be, because that's what our company does, is as long as we're paying the fee and registering the chips, which
Yeah.
I feel like it is better, because for us, since we're doing it in-house, it's getting done, and then they're just sending, every time we register 25 chips, they send us a new box of
Yeah.
25.
So,
So it just keeps,
we want to include that microchip registration fee in with the adoption fee, am I correct in?
yeah,
Okay.
that's what I would do, and then we might look at a different company
Okay.
than what you guys are using, because
Yeah.
if you did have to do that, then you would be spending $55 on a microchip.
Right, and I'm
Yeah,
still on the
right.
same bundle of microchips from when I started, and I think she paid close to $2,000 for them, and that's, the people are still having to pay $45 when they get home to register them
Yeah.
out of their own pocket.
I think
Yes.
we just might need to look at different
Yeah.
companies.
Okay, so that's,
Did you mention dog collars or cat collars in your costs? Are you letting dogs go out without dog collars?
No.
Okay,
No.
so their costs would include a dog collar and leash, and then probably a little cat collar if you could do those. That'd be great. Little bells on them would help reduce the damage to wildlife in the area.
Yeah.
your life would be crazy if they were all running around in the shelter with those bells.
I'd like to know who donated all those safer collars. I mean, there was hundreds of them there when I got there.
Awesome.
With no slip collars. I'm still using those. I still have not ran out of
They
those.
were done by the Humane Society. We customed in those for you.
Yeah, well, that's nice
Do you
because
need
those
more?
come in handy. I still have so many
Okay.
right now.
Let me know, because
Yeah.
when I had my husband do those one evening while we were sitting there, they're pretty easy to do.
Oh,
Yeah.
you made them?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
They're easy
cool.
to do.
Okay, so just real quick recap, so we stay on adoption policy, so we have that fee set, and it includes, unless there's a $75 deposit, the spay and neuter, the 1-year rabies vaccination, the deworming, the first round, possibly second round, vaccinations, 1 month of flea and tick prevention, the microchip and the registration fee, dog collar and leash, and then for cats, it's obviously the cat collar, and then cats, we have spay and neuter, 1-year rabies vaccination, deworming, first round of boosters, possibly second round, 1 month of flea and tick medicine, and then the microchip and registration fee. Are we including like the FIV and those sort of shots in that sort of?
Like the feline leukemia test.
Well, the test, but don't they get, isn't there shots that they can get?
So FIV, there's not a recommended vaccine for it.
Okay,
Feline leukemia vaccine is recommended for kittens, but then it's based off, after that, it's based off of their lifestyle. So if they're gonna be indoor-only cats, it's not a
They don't
recommended
need it.
vaccine.
Okay.
It's not a quarter vaccine.
okay, so,
And it's not something that they recommend for shelter cats to give as a quarter
Okay.
vaccine either.
okay.
Well, I had my decimal point in the wrong place a minute ago, but it's changed anyway. We're up to easily $100 plus per dog. You know, we're easily that. I just want you to realize that $100 plus per dog on 800 dogs a year is $80,000. So, you know, as long as the county and city and all are gonna be willing to budget that money to pick up that difference, that's where you're at. on all these services that you're providing. And the more I listen here, I don't even think the $100 number per dog is going to be a good number. I think it's probably gonna be closer to $120 a dog.
Yeah.
So you're
Which-
gonna have to make sure that if we're going to offer all these services and this is the amounts we're going to charge, that funding's gonna have to be made available by the county and the city.
Which I think we can set that, like, we're going to offer these and then reevaluate that number once we really get into it if we need to. But I think, again, like I said, that this kind of care is part of running a shelter, and it's what
I
I
agree,
consider
but it's not a matter of
operational.
evaluating. If you're gonna make the decision,
Yeah.
you're going to do it. Before you make that decision,
But-
you need to run the numbers approximately, look what's in the budget now, and go ahead
It's
and
true, and
ask
I-
the county
yeah,
and
and-
the city for the budget, the dollars to be able to cover that.
I agree, and I think that's a budget discussion, I think, because we need to have policies in place that we can work off of until we have those budget discussions. Are we still fine with the $100 for dogs and 45 for cats, or are you wanting to say, let's go ahead and bump it up?
No, I'm saying I'm fine right at
Okay.
the moment, over the next week, 2 weeks, whatever we're working on it as such. But before you put it into the formal policy and adopt it, you've got to know where the finances are coming from.
Okay.
You can't pass the policy and then say, we're gonna go get the financing for it. You gotta
Okay.
make sure it's there before we ever ask for it to be passed.
Warren, I know you weren't involved in that, but the commissioners had asked the Humane Society to do an evaluation of the animal shelter budget. And in doing that, I came back to a public meeting, so it's on public record, and I let the commissioners know, boy, you're gonna, to solve these problems, to address the community needs, you're darn near gonna have to double or plus this budget, which, you know, 2 of the 3 commissioners were like, really understood. Another third one really understood, but then, you know, well, maybe we don't have to do that, maybe we can cut corners here or there, and this board is not willing to cut corners anymore, which I applaud. And I applaud that you're not gonna rely on donations. You know, I wouldn't divert donations over to the general fund for anything. I'd put this back on the commissioners and say, you know, you kinda warned. You know, you were told, this isn't a surprise, you know about this, and, you know, this is where we need to be. So if you don't wanna provide this services, and you don't wanna do this, then they need to be the ones to stand up to the public and say, well, we're just gonna start euthanizing, or we're not gonna do spay neuter, or we're not gonna do treatments or take care of all of our animals. Let them do that. Give them your best recommendation. And the price is what the price is. You can't change that. You're doing a good job finding the best value that they can. But they've been given a heads up. They asked for an audit of that budget some time back. They received it from the Humane Society. It's been done. And I recommended, you know, with all of that, you've got a big chunk of money that they're gonna need to pay. What happens from there, guys, you don't need to cut for them. Make them do it.
So I do all of this for everybody now when they adopt an animal. And I'm gonna continue to do it, because I think it's the right thing to do, until somebody tells me otherwise.
Or you run out of money in the bill.
Well, yeah, I mean,
So
but I
I-
mean, it's the right thing to do not only
Yes.
for the family that is getting the animal, but it's the right thing to do for the animal.
And
Yeah.
the community,
Yeah.
and the
I mean,
community.
you can't send like a feline leukemia positive cat to a household,
Right.
not knowing that it's been tested, and then it dies 2 years later.
Right in there.
Yeah.
You got that case for me, yeah. I mean, we were lucky
You can't send a
enough to.
heartworm positive dog to a family,
Right.
and they have to pay $1,000 for treatment. Like,
Right,
Yeah.
and some of these rescues that I use, like Kathy Egan with Canine Express, Berea, and Cleveland Animal Protection League require heartworm tests. Safer test, heartworm tests, vaccinations, they don't require spay and neuter, they have a vet that does it on site. So there are some breaks in that, when those people come in and they choose those animals, there are certain costly things that I will not need to get done, because they have a vet on site.
You know, and part of my reservations on, you know, the heartworm or leaning toward euthanasia in certain situations, you know, if the desire to fund for some of these medical costs has changed at the county level, which it appears that it has, I am absolutely thrilled, very much in favor of that. But, you know, when our operations were there, and I was there on a daily basis, or I wasn't there personally, but Tammy was there personally on a daily basis. We fought the battle to where the people adopted the dog, had it for about a week, the kids are all attached to it, they take it to the vet and it tests positive for heartworm. There's no way in the world they can lay out the $700,000 to treat it. Well, the county comes unglued when we treat that animal at that time. I mean, you would have thought that we had burnt the courthouse down,
Yeah, but
spending $700-800 on that
I'm
animal.
not, when was this, like, how many?
Oh, it's probably been 10 years ago.
Yeah, so I would say, like, I know this is, I'm the younger one here, I'm gonna say it. Social media has grown so much, and if you were to say, this dog has heartworm, and that's it, like, this would be an adoptable dog, other than that, post its picture, say, we're collecting funds for this, I mean it, you can look at
But
me.
that's, you're back to donations, that's
I'm
not
just-
what we're wanting to do.
No, what I'm saying is that if we get these set funds and we actually have an operational budget to operate a shelter, which is, the purpose of the shelter is for the care of the animals, it's not to provide
Right.
people with a job, it's to care for the animals, and then people that we
Well,
provide a
it's
job.
primarily there.
And then we have an emergency fund.
Right.
This is going to be a conversation that is when we discuss budget as well. But what I'm trying to get across is that, you know, like that family, yeah, that dog should have been tested, I believe, for heartworm before being sent out. But I don't think that it should be, okay, well, we can't save it. It can be, let's try and raise the funds for this, and if we don't come up with them, then at that point we say, well, we cannot fund this care for this
In
dog.
addition to your behavior specialist, you better put a media person at her disposal.
She needs
she-
one really bad.
The county needs to pay, and if you guys say that the county isn't gonna pay, but you don't wanna euthanize, she's gonna have a lot of money. There's a lot of dogs out there with heartworm, and it's gonna break your heart
Yeah.
to do that. So she's not got the staff to do behavioral management and training, nor does she have
Yeah.
the staff to do fundraising.
Well, we're
And
aware
social
of that.
media, I mean, I know that she wants to, and I know she'll give it her best shot, but this is the county's responsibility. I'd put the heat on them and make them stand up in public and say, euthanize them.
I agree,
And then if
I
they
think,
won't do that, you say, well, then you give us the staff to help us with social media.
I think
Maybe
by,
they'll do that.
I
But
think by setting these policies, and that gives us better grounds, like we're not setting them either, the county commissioners still have to approve them, by saying, these are the policies that we would like to see, this is how the shelter would like to operate, this is the direction we are moving, and then we fully evaluate the budget, this is what we are going to need budget-wise, then it does come down to the commissioners on the yes or no. And even to the city would,
Correct.
you know, the city would like to have more information to make a better decision on how much funding we give. And Hanover could probably give a little more funding, because we do serve Hanover as well. But I think that's, if we say this is the direction the shelter would like to take, this is our goals for the shelter, and we bring it to the commissioners, and at that point, the commissioners are held responsible for those decisions. And we can say as a board, we're working as hard as we can to make this happen. But one thing I discussed, I think like my first or second meeting with the board when we didn't have staff, was we need to have someone that's managing social media and the website. One sole person dedicated to that, because I do think that's like a full-time job. They can help with other various tasks. But my opinion, sorry if I offend anyone county, but and I'm not speaking highly of myself, most of you know I do run this city social media, and it's been a learning experience, but we try and get information out there like crazy, and I feel like sometimes the county is lacking on their social media presence, and even just like press releases and getting information out there. And it needs to become a priority because of the direction the world is going. Most of our community gets their news from Facebook. They're not gonna go to the website. Why are we investing in a website if they're not even gonna go there? I get that websites need to be updated and everything, but the county should really look into investing, and we should look into saying, these are the positions that we need to fulfill, and we need to have our director, we need to have someone that does social media, answering the phones, running the website, instead of everyone jumping on there and not having consistency. And if we grow that, then we reach more rescues, we reach more people for donations for like amenities, as I like to call them, and emergency care.
There needs to be positions with specific job descriptions for each one of them. Because that's the problem that I run into a lot of the times, is everybody wants to fight over the computer work, and it's not what the job is. You're hired in there as a kennel tech no matter what. I'm a kennel tech. You know, just because my job title says director does not mean I'm not a kennel tech.
Yeah.
So that's something that they all need to understand, but they do need to have specific job duties.
Yeah.
And the problem that I also run into with that is with part-time, they also have, in this day and age, you have to have a job with insurance, or you have to have some kind of insurance, so they've got another primary obligation that supplies their insurance that they're always gonna put before their part-time job. So that's what I'm running into right now, is all these part-time girls are, you know, most of them are great, but the shelter is not their primary care right now. I need a full staff that the shelter is their primary care.
And I think, you know, budget's gonna be a huge conversation, and we all need to be really involved in that conversation, but these work sessions are so we can move forward with policy, so Lindsay has a great way to operate the shelter. So I know we can't like say, okay, 100%, we're setting for forever, it's gonna be $100 fee for dogs and whatever. Once we have those budget conversations, we can reassess that, we can go to the commissioners and ask for more where we need to, but we need to have something set in the meantime that Lindsay can operate off of. And I see, so Lindsay sent this, a while back, Joy, you may have missed it, but
Sorry.
she has like, okay, here's the adult juvenile canine adoption, so it's $100, we just discussed what's all included in here. She also has, in here that a $40 security deposit for spay and neuter, but it needs to be
That needs to be
75.
75,
Okay.
state statute.
Yeah, and then that's the same with cats, right? It doesn't matter?
Yes, it
Okay.
doesn't matter.
And then the other thing in here I see is like the adopter may choose to either leave the canine in the care of the shelter until their appointment or take them home. Do we still wanna do that?
I don't budge on rabies. They need to have their rabies shot before they leave.
Before they leave, okay.
Yeah, but as far as spay and neuter goes, yes, I am flexible on that.
Have rabies before leaving.
As long as an appointment is set up before they leave the building, yes.
Because I don't mind to like update this with the discussion, so we can then maybe next time look at it and say, okay, yep, that's what we were going for.
Yeah.
So, must have rabies.
Yeah, because that's state law,
Yes.
and I remember how much extra work that put on me when the rabies shot was not administered.
And then cat, same thing, that $30 security needs to be $75.
Okay, and on this part here where you talk about if they want to choose another vet, once the appointment's confirmed, then they can either take the canine themselves or pick them up, or leave them, or bring them to the shelter and you take them. That's
Right.
if you're using the Carroll County Clinic, right?
Yeah, if I'm using Tuesdays with her, or if I'm using Carroll County on Thursdays, if they're more comfortable dropping the animal off like the night before, then I'll just take them with the rest of the animals that I'm already taking to that location. Then they can come pick it up that
But
evening.
you're probably gonna wanna take the language out of there on
Yeah.
leaving a choice to them as to what vet.
Yeah, and
a-
that's
Yeah.
just a rough
Yeah, that
draft,
needs to
that's
come
not
out
even
of
close
there.
to being done.
Yeah, I just wrote clarify that
Yeah,
language,
get
so.
that out of there altogether.
Okay. Moving on to, and Tammy, you mentioned adoptability. I think when we do, part of it with adoptability is gonna come to like our intake process of when we have those animals come in. Obviously, they're gonna be evaluated at that point, and that's when we can scale them on like adoptability. So I think this like procedures is just, this is an adoptable dog type procedure or adoptable cat type procedure. And then once we have those discussions, we'll get
Right.
deeper into that. So you have the canine adoption procedures. What you have here is that appointments are encouraged but not mandatory. You're open now, so I think that's kind of.
Right, and I think that's what I
Yeah.
meant, like, meet and greet appointments are mandatory.
Okay, yeah.
But appointments, to get into the building are no
Okay.
longer mandatory.
So if you have a walk-in, if an adopter is interested in a specific canine, they're required to do a meet and greet with that canine in our adoption room. I agree, they should have
Yes.
to do a meet and greet, and that they should be required to bring in any pets that
Right.
they have. The meetings typically last 30 minutes to an hour. If all goes well, they will be able to adopt that canine today, obviously falling back on the spay and neuter. If the adopter has concerns about finalizing the adoption with just one meeting, they're encouraged to set up a second meeting. Or the staff will talk to them about a foster to adopt program, which is something we're discussing. I think we decided outside, we're gonna have another conversation at the foster to adopt program to better clarify that. Was just probably on the policy page. Okay, so regular adoption procedures are as follow. Fill out an adoption form. Do you have that adoption form already? And
Yeah, I mean, what we normally do, if they adopt straight from the shelter, if it's not like an early adoption form, I have an early adoption
Okay.
form. But they go through Pet Point, and we enter all the information right there, and Pet Point prints out a specific adoption form with that person's name and number and address on it.
okay.
So,
So this would be the adoption form on Pet Point.
yeah, that, I would sit there and do that with them, yes.
Okay.
Let me back up just a moment on this of bringing other animals into the
Right.
shelter. Do you have, you're from the veterinarian aspect, you can address it far better than I can. You know, these animals are gonna be brought in to introduce to the other pet they're adopting. We've done that some in the past if they were concerned they had a particular problem. We did not set it up to where it was a mandatory situation because we didn't necessarily want that volume of animals that you know nothing about coming in and out of the shelter. Do you have any concerns over the situation of bringing disease into the shelter from a cat or a dog that you know nothing about? Or any concerns of bringing one in that doesn't have proof of rabies vaccination before it comes in? Or just the general exposure to people that are in the shelter of you bring this dog into a strange environment and it bites an employee or bites a person that is there seeing other animals. I see a need for it in some cases. I'm not certain that you aren't creating some hazards. What's your thoughts?
I mean, I think the current animal shelter is kind of, I think it would be a difficult situation to bring a lot of animals in and out of there, just because it is not set up to really do that. However, I feel like it is really important if you have another dog in the household to have a meet and greet with this new dog that you plan on bringing in. So, I mean, I feel like the bare minimum for somebody that's coming in to adopt another animal is for their current animals to be up to date on rabies vaccination.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that should be a requirement for someone coming in to adopt an animal at the shelter, that their other pets are up to date on rabies.
Yeah.
It's a state law.
Yeah, and that's not something I even thought about when making that, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
Because I mean, you don't want to adopt them out if they're not even keeping up.
Right, like
Right.
if you're not taking
Yeah.
care of your own
Yeah.
animals, why are we giving you another?
Do you think it's important, is it Bordetella that spreads like crazy?
Bordetella is like, probably like, that would be the one concern that I would have.
Like, make
with-
sure they're up to date on that as well.
Yeah, like with respiratory diseases, but see, that too, like, you know, farm dogs that stay on the farm all the time, that don't go boarding, that don't go to a grooming facility, like, they don't really need Bordetella
Yeah.
because they're not exposed to it, and so I don't know that I would make that a requirement for a dog coming into
Okay.
the shelter
Yeah.
to meet and greet. I think that sanitation and cleaning policies are gonna be more important than that. I think rabies vaccination should be required because that's a zoonotic disease and there's a risk for people involved in that. And then it's a state law as well, so I think that should be a requirement for all of the animals
Which-
that would come into the shelter.
And that's, so on
To
the
be
adoption
great.
application, it probably states like, state any of the animals listed, are they up to date on their vaccines?
Yes.
So that right there, if they're not, it kinda is like, okay, why is your
Right.
animal not? No, we're not gonna, because we can make a decision, the shelter can, to say, no, we're not gonna adopt an animal out.
Right, and one of the lines on that adoption form that I have is, list your local vet, list your vet that you use. And you know what a lot of people don't, I call.
Yeah.
I call, so I mean, it's not like I don't know.
Okay.
I take the time to call myself on stuff like that, so.
So I understand Orin's concern with the meet and greet, I mean, that
Yeah.
facility is not set up
The
nicely.
facility's terrible.
In the
So, I mean,
warmer
there's
months,
no
it's
other way to
nice
say
because
it.
you can do it outside, you know,
Yeah.
but in the winter it becomes difficult, but I do find them necessary. My mother just went to adopt a dog and thought, oh, we have this dog, he's so sweet, he loves everyone, he'll be fine. No, it turned out he was like, I don't want another dog in this house.
Right.
No, thank you, and so they were like, oh, we had no idea.
Yeah.
Dogs
Yeah.
are like toddlers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm-
I'm just trying to suggest that when we write some of these policies, we word them in such a way that it gives the shelter director and the staff the ability to make the decision when some of these things are needed and when they can waive them, that we don't put in
Yeah.
language that's absolute. There may be times that Lindsay can ask enough questions and it's two farm dogs that run loose
Yeah.
and there's no need to go through those
It
steps.
could even be then that a meet and greet may be required. And then add in like that
Yes.
any dogs coming into the shelter must have their rabies vaccines at the bare minimum.
Any
Kind
dog
of leave
dog,
yeah.
some flexibility in some areas. and,
Yeah, because there's gonna be times where I refuse adoptions.
Yeah.
Because those animals are my children until they're not. So, I mean, they basically are, so,
Yeah.
In the area that you get into, keep in mind, because I've been through this with the county, as soon as you turn one down, their immediate place they'll go is to elected officials, or they
Right.
used to go to the county judge as
Right.
well, and they get feedback and so forth. They were fine as long as we could show that we were making those decisions on an objective, established basis. If it was too much subjective decision-making, they would frown on that very heavily and say, no, we're gonna tell you to go ahead and adopt the dog to the person.
right, and I'll tell you right now.
And that's the good
I'm-
thing about the rabies vaccination is that it's very objective.
Yes,
Yeah.
You
that's
keep your
very
dog up to
good.
date or you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I'm not afraid of that
And
kind
we
of
had,
controversy.
we
I
had
have to
some
get in the
lists,
middle
and
of
I
it,
think
so.
they're probably so existed that were on a do not adopt.
Yes.
You know, that we knew from the situation was a hoarding situation, or, and we wouldn't adopt those people.
Yeah, and we also red flag people who relinquish their animals to the shelter.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a big red flag too. You're,
So
you know,
we may wanna look into also like what is considered,
A proper placement for a dog.
yeah, of like, what is going to create a red flag that we're not going to wanna adopt that dog or cat out to that home. I mean, one thing for sure that we need to add in here that I don't think I see the language is you must be 18 years or older.
right, yes, no
So-
minors are allowed to adopt by themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so I've taken a bazillion notes to add in there, and I can just go in and fill this in and the board can review it. So moving on to cats, I updated those $30 fees, and the $75 fees will be the same as, what we did with the canines, and then appointments are encouraged. Do you require a meet and greet with a feline?
With people,
Okay.
potential adopters, yes.
Okay.
With the dogs that we have there, I do not require people to bring their cats from home in to meet. We have a cat room that I can turn
Yeah.
to test a dog in.
Okay.
But I mean,
Now, if they have a dog at home and they say, hey, my dog's great with cats, are you gonna say, hey, we'd like to set up a meet and greet to make sure that your dog's fine, or do you trust the human?
they're welcome to bring, that's something I would give an option on, they're welcome to bring that dog in.
So
If they
maybe
make an
required.
appointment for the adoption room. I don't want a bunch of people walking in the lobby with their dogs on
Yeah.
leashes. They are to make an appointment with that adoption room.
Yeah.
Same thing.
That can be really inhumane.
Yeah.
for kids.
That's what I was thinking too, because my cats would freak out, I was just,
Yeah,
yeah.
when we first took the shelter, I had a volunteer that used to take little
Interesting
kittens
interactions
to
in your
each of the
front
kennel
lobby
dog
all the
kennels.
time.
That's like-
And I stopped
Not
it
knowing
immediately
whether
because a
dog-
Okay.
dog
That's gonna be-
snarling and growling at a cat.
Yeah,
You know, it's a
Yeah.
tricky call, but you're better off to say, take it home if there's a problem, bring it
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, and we need
Rather
to,
than torment your shelter cats, which
Right,
are already
yeah.
stressed.
we need to make sure we have a policy where people feel like if it doesn't, and I know you have the foster to adopt, or I call it a couple before you commit program, where people feel like, if I take this this animal home and I've adopted them and it just doesn't work out, I can bring this dog or cat back. We need to make sure that they
Yes.
feel like they have that option.
right, right. And that's a big thing with the foster, that's what I encourage, that's why I encourage the foster to adopt program a lot, is because I have so many dogs at home, I know that sometimes you bring one in, it's just not a right fit. It's not anybody's fault, it's not any of the dog's fault, and there's a right fit for every family, and not every dog's gonna fit to your family.
The best thing we found for mating or pairing owner and cat was the cat room. And the person just went in and the cats that came to that person were clearly attracted to that person.
Are you talking
Company
like
with it.
where the cats aren't in kennels, it's just like an open, where
And
all the
it's a
cats are
cat room,
like
just like you would have at a zoo or any other place. There's a cat room. And those work really, really well with spay, neuter, rabies.
Yeah.
Everybody's defleed, everybody's
So like
healthy.
where the cats are all living together instead of in the individual
But
cages.
you have
Yeah.
all these little areas, I mean, Shane
Yeah.
can talk to you about it, he does something very similar where, and we could, you know, I'm sure, a cat room is a good idea.
I agree,
And then they just come in
I
and
would love
relax
that.
and kitties come over and
Yeah.
make their
Where
buddy.
would I put it?
Sure, they'll come visit yours for a bottle.
And
or-
usually,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a space for it, but you just have to rework what's happening there, so.
I have so many ideas
I mean,
of things that I wanna put in there, and it's just not feasible, and it just
You know,
makes
like
me-
that front
Yeah.
room, right off of the lobby, you could potentially take the cages out of that.
That's where it
Because
was.
that's where like all of the healthy cats go.
Yeah.
We have our medical
Build
room,
little
and have
cat
the healthy
vaults
cat
at the
room,
top.
so you could potentially.
That's what we
have
had.
that
Bloomington Shelter
Yeah.
is cool.
I mean,
But that room,
The cat room is really,
When
you
I
got
volunteered
a
at the
window
Dollar
there,
Tree, they
and
had cat
scratchies
rooms
and
and there's the
trees.
healthy
You
cats.
could have a patio out the
And
window.
obviously they
It'd be
like, you know, anyone with respiratory infections are separate, but like even the FIV positives, they had their own cat room. Like, these are all FIV positive, but you can still adopt them, they can
Yeah.
still have a life, 'cause,
It dramatically
but they were
changes
completely in a different room
Changes
too,
you.
so.
Yes.
Well, we're getting close to our hour and a half, is there anything else we need to go over?
So then,
I don't think we're gonna really get to euthanasia policy
thing
tonight.
is, for our next, you've taken the notes and so forth. Can you, with Lindsay, update that policy and email it out to us?
That
And
is-
then we can communicate back and forth in the meantime?
Yes, that's my
If we
goal.
see
I
any other
do
changes.
leave for vacation first thing in the morning, but I return on Tuesday, and then I will get all this funneled in there.
do you want me to do it? I can do it, because I'll be around.
Okay, yeah.
I can do that. and
I would
send it to
appreciate
you.
that,
At
yeah.
least this one.
And they film,
Yeah.
so you can
Adoption.
even watch if you need to like go back and look at notes, so.
Shane, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, I invite,
Just listening.
How do I watch that?
so go to the, do you have Facebook? Jefferson County Community Television.
Kinda what I was thinking.
Yeah. I don't think we're gonna get to euthanasia policy today. I think adoption policy's a big one, which you said would be,
I
but
told you so.
yeah,
Well, and as far as like the preventative care
Right.
stuff,
Yes.
that's pretty cut and dry. Like,
Yes.
there is a standard set forth by the Lake Shelter Veterinarian, like the society and the animal herders, of like what needs to happen as far as standard of care. So there's already protocols out there and lists of what we need to do. So it's pretty cut and dry as far as the preventative care goes.
Yeah, and it's so important, and being on a budget is rough in those circumstances, because if you send an animal home without being heartworm tested or feline leukemia tested, and they end up having it and the family goes through that, that will deter them from adopting, possibly for the rest of,
Yeah.
that one bad adoption experience will keep them from adopting for the rest of their life, and that's not what we want to be responsible for.
Yeah, how's your budget coming?
yeah, and I know we may wanna include something, you know, I know there's some illnesses that maybe, you're doing a better job of like quarantining them, so if they pop up, but I know there may still be a circumstance where like, oh, the cat goes home and then its sickness starts to show.
Right.
Sure. it will.
If we just hold true to like, okay, we will cover the care of this cat.
Right, and that's what I've had to do so far, because I can only diagnose what I can see.
Yeah,
I'm not a doctor,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I've had a lot of cases where they're fine, and then they get a phone call, they're not a week later.
yeah.
You have no idea.
It's okay, we got it done,
Well,
that's all that matters.
say we have a regular meeting on the 6th of April, so how's the 20th of April sound for our next policy
As
meeting?
long as IU doesn't play.
So that-
It's March Madness season,
It's
Ray.
a week from today.
The 20th is.
20th of April is
Oh,
5 weeks.
I
ago.
think
We're
we
gonna
should-
need
I
another
think
work
you- I think
session.
we should meet next week,
Yeah, I think we should meet next week on a work session.
Well, we could do that.
because you'll never get
You'll
all this
never get
stuff
it done
done.
if you don't.
Yeah.
I can't be here on the 30th, the week after that,
So we,
but I can be here next week.
23rd then?
Yep, 23rd at 5:30.
Today's the 16th.
And that one,
5:30.
so we should have a good working document of adoption policy by that point. So then we move on to euthanasia policy,
Okay.
We have the wrong
which I think will be a big
I
discussion.
got the most recent, so I think that we finally have the right one now.
I think on the email that Hannah sent one to, whatever's on it that went out is correct for in the last day or two.
Okay,
So you'll have
Yeah.
it there in that group.
but I'll try to get this done in the next 2 days.
Okay, that'd be great.
Is there anything anybody specifically will need from me, or that would want me to bring to this next meeting, anything?
I think it would help if you could put together a number of animals that have been adopted so
Okay.
far this year, and then we can project that out as to what we
Okay, yeah,
think
I
we're
can do
looking
that.
for on an annual basis, so we can apply some of these numbers and to things and know. And then if you can get a little more detailed total of what you think the costs are going to be
Okay.
for the standard medical that you're gonna provide, average.
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful.
Is there any way to find out like what it was last year, like total adoptions?
Yeah.
Is there any
I can run
information
it
about
through
that?
Pet Point.
Okay, because
As long as they're plugged in
like
there.
probably from January to now, the adoption rate is probably lower because
Mhm.
we're in like that
Yes.
winter season where dogs are not
Right, and
running.
you haven't hit kitten and
Correct.
puppy season.
Yeah. kittens and puppies.
I'm hitting puppy season right now.
Yeah.
When,
Although on the cat side, she
Yeah.
inherited a huge number to get.
Yeah.
when I'm having trouble running from last year on Pet Point is where the vet appointments weren't always put into the computer. So I think only half of them were ever put into the computer when they got back from the vet. So we've been on top of that so far, you know, give or take a couple, just from being busy, but that's the only thing I'm having trouble running on Pet Point as far as last year goes.
Another I want to be clear too, my comment on as far as the amount county and city are willing to budget, you know, my decision on that isn't totally based on just what went on 10 years ago. You know, that has an influence on it, but it's also based on what's been going on the last several years. I mean, there was some pressure. Jenny just didn't decide totally on her own that she was going to limit the amount of money she was spending.
Right.
Somewhere along the line, it was made clear to her by someone that this is a good thing if you can keep things below the budget and keep the budget below what it was the year before. So, you know, I'm not quite as convinced that the political will is there to fund it, but I hope that it is.
Yeah, me too.
I'll move we adjourn then.
All in favor?